Capturing the news, the headlines, the changes, the news, the views and local opinions, in motion and as they happen. It's time now for Darpan's Local News.
Darpan's Local News. I am Sheetal Walia. In the headlines today, New Zealanders may still have more than 700 million old coins to return to the bank, use or donate before they become invalid by October 31st. National leader Don Brash said that while his party was committed to lowering taxes, it might take some years, prompting rebuttal from Labour, saying his U-turn proves that last year's big election tax cut bribe was nothing more than a hollow promise. Falun Gong practitioners in New Zealand held a protest at Aotea Square and urged the Chinese government to immediately stop the persecutory acts against Falun Gong practitioners both inside and outside of China. Councillor Richard Simpson says that Digital Earth's new geospatial technology will help authorities to make crucial decisions. At the Sky City Theatre on Monday, 2006 Women in Film and Television New Zealand Awards saw a record crowd of especially women of all hues and shades from the film and television sector. Auckland Indian Association hosted the Indian Union Minister for Overseas Foreign Affairs, Vyala Ravi, at a function held at the Mahatma Gandhi Centre on the eve of Diwali, attended by a host of dignitaries. Muslims around New Zealand celebrating Eid al-Fitr on Tuesday as the month-long daylight fast of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan came to an end. And now for the news in detail. New Zealanders may still have more than 700 million old coins to return to the bank, use or donate before they become invalid in a week's time, the Reserve Bank said. After next Tuesday, the old 5 cent, 10 cent, 20 cent and 50 cent coins will no longer be legal tender. So far, just over 280 million coins have been returned, but more are out there, Reserve Bank Currency Manager Brian Lang said. National leader Don Brash said that while his party was committed to lowering taxes, it might take some years. He stressed that National has other priorities, including effective public services and strong public institutions. National went into the last election promising significant tax cuts during its first 18 months of government, and worth $9.4 billion over 3 years. Finance Minister Michael Cullen accused Dr. Brash of slithering, saying his U-turn proves that last year's big election tax cut bribe was nothing more than a hollow promise.
Well, I'm accused by Michael Cullen and I've been hired in making a U-turn. The speech I made, 10 days ago now, made it very clear indeed that the National Party was and still is committed to reducing taxes. What I did say was that we cannot at this stage be precise about the exact number, exact tax rate that we'd have, because let's face it, it's nearly 3 years, or 2.5 years anyway, before the next budget which a national government could bring down. It would be grossly irresponsible to specify a particular tax rate at this point. But the National Party remains firmly committed to reducing the tax burden on hard-working New Zealanders.
To a question of how violence is growing in New Zealand society and whether he was satisfied by the steps the present government is taking, Dr. Brash had this to say.
I think it's very worrying that there's been a marked increase in crime, particularly a marked increase in violent crime in recent times. That's partly domestic violence, but it's also violence against strangers. People get angry and people get killed, and that's a very worrying feature. I think it's partly related to the increased use of methamphetamine, or P, the drug, which tends to make people very violent and indeed quite psychotic. And I think that's a real way the government is totally failing to deal with that problem.
Where do you think the present government is failing in some specific areas and not being able to successfully, put on leash the rising crime rate?
Well, I think the government is failing in a wide range of areas. Crime is clearly one of them. Big increase in crime, the government's failing to deal with that. We've seen a big problem in the health sector with tens of thousands of people taken off waiting lists. I think culled is the word that Pete Hodgson uses. And he's put pressure on district health boards to take people off the waiting list in order to make the figures look better. And really that's a con. And of course, in recent weeks, we've seen the government squirming and squealing, trying to avoid responsibility for using some $800,000 of taxpayers' money to fund their campaign last year. They finally and very reluctantly agreed to pay back that money, but in doing that, they also admit their guilt and effectively incriminate themselves for having broken the law by spending more than they're legally entitled to spend in the election last year. They were allowed to spend $2.4 million. We know they spent at least $2.8 million. We suspect it was more than that.
In the meantime, National has dashed the Maori Party's hopes of repealing the foreshore and seabed law, saying it is most unlikely to support co-leader Tariana Turia's bill. Maori Party's co-leader Tariana Turia's private members' bill was pulled from the ballot recently, less than a month after it was lodged.
We haven't seen the bill yet, or at least I haven't seen the bill. I think Jerry Brownlee may just have seen it, but I haven't seen it myself. We certainly have not discussed as a caucus what our position on that will be.
But then he has already made a statement saying that, we are unlikely to support it straight away.
Yeah, I will say, I haven't myself.
Sending out wrong signal?
Well, I think both the Maori Party and the National Party don't like the present Foreshore and Seabed Act, but for quite different reasons. And we don't want to mislead the Maori Party or mislead New Zealanders generally by supporting something which may have the result which we don't want. But as I say, I haven't seen the text of that bill yet, and I'll withhold my judgment until we've seen that.
Last month, Don Brash provoked a storm of discussion when he questioned those who talked as if the Maori remain a distinct indigenous people. In view of the research presented by Environmental Science and Research, ESR, senior scientist Dr. Rod Lee at an American Society of Human Genetics conference in New Orleans last week, that said despite the significant levels of European genetic content, Maori remained genetically unique. He said the latest research was irrelevant to the point he had been making.
The point I was simply making was that when the Treaty of Waitangi was signed in 1840, it was realistic to think of two totally distinct and separate groups. The indigenous Maori people on one side of the table and the European colonists on the other side of the table. Of course, nearly 2 centuries later, that's really no longer a good representation of what New Zealand is like. Maori are very much integrated into our society, very much part of New Zealand life, but quite in that respect, quite unlike indigenous people in some other parts of the world who are quite distinct from the mainstream community.
Many New Zealand Falun Gong practitioners believe they have been put on a blacklist held by the Chinese government. Some practitioners have had their passport renewals and visa applications refused. 7 practitioners were arrested when they visited China in 1999. In New Zealand, Falun Gong activities are constantly monitored by people working for the Chinese government. Suspicious-looking people frequently take photos of Falun Gong practitioners when they hold activities to clarify the truth and expose the persecution in China. They've also had eggs thrown at them. A practitioner's car windows were smashed during a major truth clarification event, and an older practitioner was punched to the ground during a recent march down Queen Street. Under pressure from Chinese authorities in New Zealand, a Falun Gong poster was removed from Auckland International Airport in April 2002. It's also believed that due to pressure from the Chinese consulate, Falun Gong practitioners will refuse to participate in some local Chinese celebrations. In 2001, a reliable source informed Falun Gong practitioners in New Zealand that Chinese authorities had sent spies to imitate Falun Gong practitioners to gather information. The source of this information requested to remain anonymous due to obvious reasons. Falun Gong practitioners in New Zealand call upon the Chinese government to immediately stop the persecutory acts against Falun Gong practitioners both inside and outside of China.
We are New Zealand Falun Gong practitioners. We regularly come out around Auckland to tell people about the persecution of Falun Gong in China. Falun Gong has been persecuted for 7 years, and in March this year they found more than 36 concentration camps across China. We've come today to show people the brutal torture methods used by the Chinese Communist Party. We've also come to show people the beauty of Falun Dafa through the gentle exercises. I've only been a practitioner for 7 months, but I've experienced many benefits from Falun Gong. Yeah, my health and my concentration have improved markedly, so it's great.
7 years ago, I've been back to China to see my mother, and I've been put in the jail for 1 month, nearly 1 month, And in the jail, I've been tortured with electric shock. That was happening like they're using two Chinese acupuncture needle to impale the needle, two needle into each of my leg. Then they connect to the machine, which is a very the low voltage but high frequency.